so many different important people in the room to have an elevated conversation about tech, small business startups, and the future of investment. And so, what was that conversation like? The people in the room. Michigan Chronicle Pancakes and Politics starts right now.
Good morning and welcome to Series 17, Forum 2 of the Michigan Chronicle Pancakes and Politics. My name is Kathy Ned, and I am the president of Real Times Media News Group, which is a collection of 5 iconic African-American news brands across the country: the Atlanta Daily World, the Atlanta Tribune, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, and the Michigan Chronicle right here. I want to welcome you this morning. The topic is, can Southeast Michigan become a go-to destination for startups and high-growth companies? I really hope you enjoy the discussion this morning. Without further ado, I'd like to bring to the podium my boss, Hiram E. Jackson, the president of Real Times Media, the CEO of Real Times Media, and the publisher of the Michigan Chronicle.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. You know, we don't take these for granted. They're always packed. We always have a huge demand for tickets, but I always want to start by saying thank you. You don't do something like this and make it sustainable without great partners, and so I always like to start off by thanking the sponsors. Get in the habit of forgetting one or two, so I got my notes this morning. So I want to start with our largest sponsors, our broadcast partner, GM, General Motors, thank you. Our Overdrive partner, Business Leaders for Michigan. Our Pioneer partner, Rocket Mortgage. And our Platinum partners, of course, Walker Miller Energy Services, Signal Restoration, and DTE. And our featured sponsor today, you're going to hear from Ms. Margaret Trimmer at Delta Dental of Michigan. Please give them a round of applause. Are there any elected officials in the room? I saw our county executive, Warren Evans. Thank you for coming this morning. Anyone else back there? Thank you. Thank you for coming. And I always want to thank the Michigan Chronicle staff and the Real Times Media staff. We have some members of our Real Times Media staff from out of town today. We have A.R. Shaw, who's our executive editor in Atlanta, standing right there. Thanks, AR. And our managing editor of the Chicago Defender, Takuma Roback, is with us this morning. Glad they can join us. They wanted to come see what all the fuss was about, maybe take it back home. Thanks for coming, guys. I'm going to introduce Michael Bickers. He's the regional president for Detroit and Southeastern Michigan PNC Bank. And immediately after Michael, I want Dennis Archer Jr., the chairman and founder of 1642 Ventures, is going to follow Mike up right after to bring greetings and moderate the panel. This is a really special panel today. Entrepreneurs create jobs, create excitement, repopulate our area. We have a full panel, very exciting. So we're going to sit down and listen to what they have to say. Thank you very much.
I'm going to try to be quick as usual. So good morning, everybody. So this month is Great Big Cheer Month at PNC, and Thousands of our people across 50-some-odd markets, even today, are out making tricycles for little ones and games and creating art for teachers and thanking them for their efforts. And those kids have dreams too. And also, we're reading to pre-K kids, as you all know, all throughout PNC, and those kids come at me with everything, and they have hopes and dreams too. And then I was with some young leaders from Detroit Economic Club a few weeks ago, and then afterwards, sort of a fireside chat, and they shared with me their dreams too. And then we spoke in reception when our chief economist was in town last week at the book Cadillac. We did a pre-reception with some Wayne State University students and some other schools, and afterwards, those kids tell me their dreams too, and their hopes and aspirations as well. And so we have interns and associates inside of PNC where I do a fireside chat with a group of them probably every month about their families and their careers and their hopes and dreams too. And I bring all of that up because today, as we talk about this question around can Michigan sort of participate when you think about innovation and so on, we really don't have a choice in Michigan but to answer that question in the affirmative over time, or two things are going to happen. We're going to lose those young people that have those dreams to other states, and those that are left behind or can't leave will get left behind one way or the other. So thank you for coming. I look forward to the show.
Good morning. Slowly but surely, Hiram is relinquishing power. And so this morning, he asked that I introduce Margaret Trimmer to give some brief sponsor remarks. You know, typically we have a video, the man on the streets. So we're giving the streets a break this morning, and we're going to hear from Margaret. Margaret has, for as long as I have known her, which has been a while now, has been a strong advocate for kids, particularly black kids, and education in Detroit, for women's rights and women's opportunities. And she's doing some really exciting things. I'm sure she's not going to be able to talk about them all this morning, but I would really follow what Delta Dental is doing from a community investment standpoint, and ironically, from a venture standpoint related to today. You would not think that a dental insurance provider has a venture fund that invests in deals that impact urban communities, but that's in fact one of the responsibilities that Margaret has. And so we'd love to hear from you, Margaret, some brief remarks this morning.
Good morning. And thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Hiram. It's an incredible privilege and an honor to sponsor this series, but it's also a victory because I have chased sponsorship, and it's been a crowded field. Everybody wants to be in this room. And I want to be in this room on behalf of Delta Dental because just about every conversation that happens here aligns with our goals to build healthy, smart, vibrant communities for all, an emphasis on inclusion. And that conversation is really always powerful in this room. And in fact, today's conversation is about making sure that the economic conditions in this region are robust enough to support entrepreneurs and their startup businesses. And I would submit that if the commentary in the room today suggests that we're not ready, that the people in this room will walk out determined to fix that. And that's the power of pancakes and politics, thinking big and getting it done. Enjoy the morning.
I will first, so that they don't continue to stand in the back, it's pretty tight back there, bring out our panel, which I'm very excited about because we have in one place those responsible for fostering and encouraging economic development, particularly as it relates to the startup space, and we have those who have actually done it from startup to unicorn status to successful exit. So I'm very excited to hear from this panel in the 1 hour that we have here today. First, I'm going to ask Patty Glaser to come up from Invest Detroit. She's the Executive Vice President and Managing Director. She joined the entity in 2014. She's got 30 years of experience in the tech sector since she was in high school. Her primary responsibilities include sourcing and facilitating the development of early stage and high growth companies, the topic here today. She most recently managed the office for Arsenal Venture Partners, a national venture capital firm focused on IT, energy, industrial technologies. She came out of Accenture, as did Dean Brody, that I think is here today, and she sits on multiple boards as well as has multiple directorships in the startup ecosystem. Doug Song is the co-founder of the Song Foundation and former co-founder and CEO of Duo Security. For those of you who follow the business news, they know that Duo was Michigan's first tech unicorn and largest venture-backed acquisition. He's a founder and he's a funder, and he's a champion for growing community wealth, economic, social, cultural, and environmentally. He also is co-founder of the Michigan Founders Fund, helping entrepreneurs turn business success into positive community impact. Doug, likewise, with Patty, sits on multiple boards, but to me, most impressive is the Song Foundation, founded by Doug and his wife, to invest in people and organizations that improve the quality of life throughout southeastern Michigan. Quentin Messer is the CEO, president, and chair of the Michigan Strategic Fund. As the MEDC CEO and president of the fund, he is charged with implementing and executing the MEDC's core mission of business development and attraction, community development, and providing access to capital and enhancing Michigan's image and brand with a focus on building a strong and equitable economy for all Michiganders. These responsibilities include managing the administration of all programs, funds, personnel, contracts, and administrative functions for the MEDC. So if y'all need some money, that's your guy. Lastly, I'd like to bring up Dr. Marla Rencher, who is president of Detroit Means Business. For many of us, I gotta believe, there's Carla Walker-Miller is in here. Good morning, Carla. For those of you who know Carla, this is an entity that she's extraordinarily passionate about. And Dr. Rencher, we're very happy to have you at the helm of the organization. But Detroit Means Business is fully dedicated to stabilizing and scaling Detroit small businesses. She is co-founder of a Commune Angel inclusive network of angel investors. Previously, she was TechTown's senior director of technology-based programs, and she has also founded or co-founded 3 tech startups. So what I most immediately love about the folks up here, part of organizations, is that you have done it yourselves. And so I think that brings a lot of value to the discussion. Because we are the Michigan Chronicle and because we are the Real Times media, if you took a look at the flyer that went out, it said that we're going to have a discussion on whether Michigan is positioned to become an incubator for companies that need to build and scale through venture capital. But we know we got to put a black lean on everything. So we are going to not only talk about that, A, but B, we're going to talk about whether this has been done inclusively, which I think we can all guess what that answer is. And most importantly, what are we going to do to fix it? First, what is a startup? I think that a lot of times that we used to use, years ago, we used to say NUCO. And now startup is a buzzword. But when you think about it, good morning, Dad. That's what senior status gets you, because if I walked in somewhere late, I'd be in trouble. When Chris Jackson started Jackson Consulting Group, that was a startup. When Frank Torrey started Torrey and Bruglio with a pickup truck and a lawnmower with his uncle, that was a startup. But as I went to go look how to define startups for this conversation, there really wasn't a satisfactory answer, but I will tell you what I found to help frame the conversation. Startups are companies or ventures that are focused on a single product or service that the founders want to bring to the market. These companies typically don't have a fully developed business model and, more crucially, lack adequate capital to move into the next phase of business. So then you say, well, when are you no longer a startup? So I looked up, at what point is a company no longer a startup? And Google says that it has to do with the scale of a company. If the scale of your business is sizable, with no definition for sizable, it's a clear sign that you can no longer be defined as a startup. Scale is determined by using indicators such as revenue, number of employees, and the age of a business, with no definition for any of the three of those either. So, for the purposes of today, we are going to use the term startup, I think fairly, to represent companies in tech that are high growth, that are not manufacturing, because we talk about manufacturing, the importance of those jobs significantly, and I think enough in a number of different milieus. So we've kind of defined startup and we've kind of defined getting out of it. I think that we all know that there are disparities between the black and brown communities as it relates to all opportunities in all business sectors. But in order to frame the discussion, if you would allow me to just give some facts to provide a basis to have this discussion this morning. Over the last 10 years, VC investing has increased 600%, and the volume has increased 75%. But overall in the U.S., black entrepreneurs have historically faced disparities in securing VC funding, receiving less than 2% of each dollar. Black women receive 0.34%. By the end of 2022, there was a 36% drop in overall VC funding, but black entrepreneurs saw a 45% decrease. In the venture capital workforce, we are very, very, very significantly underrepresented. And in those fields, as in many job opportunities come from personal references. And if you're not in the circle to be referred, then you're going to continuously be left out of those opportunities. Derek Batts, who I think is here somewhere this morning from the Future Heritage Fund, which is an 80% African-American owned fund in their first stages of $75 million, he sent me some facts that I think were also very interesting. Venture capital firms with female partners have almost a 10% more profitable exits and 1.5% higher annual overall fund returns than all white male funds. Black and Latinx investors, yes, absolutely. As you would not be surprised, black and Latinx investors represent just 3% of VCs and only 1% and 1.9% of VC-backed founders, respectively. White men manage 98.6% of an $82.24 trillion managed by the U.S. asset management industry. And 84% of VCs are male, and of those, 80% are white. In 2021, VC-backed startups raised more than $345 billion in VC funding, yet only 2.4% was invested in startups led by female founders, 1.3% by black founders, and 2.1% in Hispanic founders. I think none of these facts are surprising. For each one of these panels that we have, we're often talking about existing disparities. But in an age where we are looking at these new industries, the disparities start from when our kids are not being properly educated in those fields that are required to prepare them for these sorts of jobs, to there being an old boys network keeping us out of jobs, to not getting equal access to financing to fund our ideas. So we have a lot of work to do. So, Quentin, we're going to start with you. So, really, with each of you, there's really two subjects at hand. There's a lot of press, Quentin, around we as a state, you as a department, the governor as the executive. Are we doing enough to be competitive related to the other states in the country that are all vying for these high growth, significant investment, large job creating opportunities? Are we doing enough? Are our incentives enough? Are we assembling deals and responses fast enough? So just the general competitive nature as you would handicap it. And then second, what are we doing to include underrepresented folks, Black folks, Latino folks, women, et cetera, at the MEDC and state level?
Sure. So thanks for affording me the opportunity, and to our elected officials, I want to give honor to them, and especially to your father. I'm a recovering attorney, so he was an inspiration to me, even when I was growing up in Jacksonville, Florida. But to your first question, the answer is we always have to do more to ensure competitiveness of our state and more particularly of this region. And I think even more particularly, and I think I would give not only the governor and the lieutenant governor, but bipartisan members of the legislature, I think there's a beginning sense, maybe too late, maybe haltingly, maybe not at the pace that people would want, the need to disaggregate success and opportunity across racial, gender, sexual orientation, religious, beginning to understand, is growth permeating all segments of the Michigan population living on both peninsulas? So, greatness, and that's what we aspire to, is a painful journey. I think back to the documentary about Michael Jordan. I'm a sports fanatic. So Michael Jordan, The Last Dance, and he said, greatness has a cost. And I think we in Michigan are beginning to understand what that cost is, not only in the immediate term, but the intermediate term and the long term. And we understand the multivariable factors that go into that consistent road to greatness. To the point about our opportunities as dispersed to people of color, the answer is no, but we're in process. So a couple of things, and then I'll turn it back over to you. One of the reasons why the lieutenant governor and the governor really pushed to have a fellowship for folks who are typically underrepresented in venture capital, because you need to have not only the founders like Doug and others here, but you need to have the people who are going to fund them to be able to have a certain sense of sensibility. A lot of times people say, we want sweat equity, we want you to go to friends and family. Well, for historic reasons, it's hard for friend and family to be there. So you have people on credit cards, you have people second and third mortgages, literally on the precipice. And sometimes, that's an unsustainable model. And I think the last thing I would say is we understand we have to do more. I would say elections have consequences from my role, because I think a lot of times people say, why don't things happen? There doesn't seem to be focus. I spend most of my time, in fact, I got text this morning, counting votes on various issues. And I think that we have to understand, and I think there's a growing consensus that we will never be who we should be as a state if economic opportunity and prosperity doesn't look more like this room. That's just good business sense. I want to take the morality out of it. I don't want people to, I feel good. Who cares? Green is the point. And you talked about the ultimate competitiveness. I believe we're on the precipice, particularly with this generation, 18 to 34, deciding with their feet, look at statistics about where kids are going to college. Inclusivity is winning. And when we have that sensibility, we're going to be able to draw talent, which makes it easier for Doug and other venture capitalists to fund. It makes it easier for serendipity to happen, and it makes it easy for folks in the startup ecosystem to bring those elements together. So work to be done, but I like Michigan's trajectory.
Thank you. Patty, bringing it down to Detroit, because Quentin, as we know, has responsibility to the state, I would ask you those two same questions. What are we doing to ensure that Detroit is competitive as a city, right? Because it's great to get people to come to Michigan, but there's some of us in the room that we are focused on the city of Detroit. You're focused on the city of Detroit. What are we doing to make Detroit more competitive, and what are you doing in your organization to make sure that it's inclusive as it relates to allocation of opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to be clear, though. So I am part of Invest Detroit, but the venture team, we invest across Michigan. High tech, high growth is not a city job, right? It takes a wider region. It takes communities. It takes a larger geography. So often we think about Detroit, Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, and we're trying to compete as separate cities for that high growth, high tech sort of startup hub, when that's not what should be happening. It really should be regional. We should be banding together more and saying, how do we come together with such amazing assets that each of these different hubs bring and make a bigger whole, make a bigger Michigan. That being said, we do care about Detroit at Invest Detroit, and we do care about building a really robust ecosystem here. When we started the venture team back in 2010, we were the first venture fund in the city. And the idea was, hey, if we can start capital here and start funding companies in Southeast Michigan from Detroit, will that attract other capital sources? And so then we saw DVP come, we saw Fontanellis, Invest Michigan, Assembly Ventures now. So we've got a stronger group of capital here in the city, which I do think is important. I think it's important that wherever you are, you know that you can run into investors at coffee shops, other founders, and that density. Density is where we struggled. COVID did not help Detroit from that perspective. So as we are starting to come out of the sort of the pandemic time, the need to invest in place-based areas where the entrepreneurs can come together, where investors can gather, where we're mentors, that we have a network together where we're investing and building up. It does take people, it takes interactions, has to be face-to-face in my mind. Zoom was helpful to get us through, but we now need to have these places of innovation where we can truly drive change. So a lot still needs to happen, but I do think we can get back. There's some great initiatives that have been started, with Central Station, and obviously we have Tech Town, we have the University of Michigan Innovation Center. So there's lots of ideas, lots of places. But again, I do think we need to seriously think about how do we be intentional about making sure there's enough density of entrepreneurship in the city.
Marlo, you at Detroit Means Business seems to be even more micro-focused as relates to ensuring that people of color get an equal shot. And so talk about what that environment that you're working in Detroit looks like, and really how could we help you achieve that goal? And maybe just a little bit about what Detroit Means Business does in a synopsis. Carla will thank you for that later.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me here. I want to thank the entrepreneurs who are in the room specifically, too. I think that part of the opportunity of Detroit Means Business is that there are a lot of business service organizations that exist. There's, things that are happening in the city to help in terms of resources. There's, obviously business serving organization, but what the opportunity is with Detroit Means Business is to make that connection, connect a business owner with the resources that we need, because right now, somewhere between 1% and 10% of the business community is actually being served by business serving organization, and probably more on the 1%. And so we're here at Detroit Means Business to make that connection happen, and to make it happen from the perspective of the small business owner. So we're in that way, the voice of the small business owner. And I think that part of the joy that I have in coming there is because I have this tech background, because I'm highly sensitive to high growth and high growth opportunities and how much we are not being included in those opportunities. I'm just really concerned about that. And what I recognize is that you can't be inclusive if you're inviting somebody to a system and not changing that system at its fundamental level. So what I mean by that is, changing some of the power dynamics. I really love what Chris is doing with Undemo Day, right? And changing up kind of the power dynamics. In fact, when we were with, I'm with Commune Angels, which is an inclusive angel network, and we had a opportunity to connect with funders, and we did it in a way where it wasn't just pitch, where there's this, this group of underrepresented folks who are pitching to a group that's widely white men. It was a let's sit down together, let's learn things together, and let's change some of that power dynamic so that when we do get the opportunity to perhaps make some different things happen, the dynamic is different. And so what I'm interested in doing, and I think what we as a team are interested in doing, is introducing folks to what high growth is and what high growth means. It's not something that's clear or new, and also in some of the ecosystem dynamics that we have, we're not necessarily thinking about small businesses and how they can make transitions. So I think that's a lot of the opportunity that we have with Detroit Means Business.
Doug, I have had the opportunity to invest in a number of early stage ventures. A couple of founders are here today, but I've found a very interesting similarity between the startup investment ecosystem and political fundraising. One, you can't count other people's money. And two, you can't necessarily just rely on those close to you. And so by way of analogy, I can just remember when my father, and Warren, you may have experienced this too when you first ran for office, but when my dad ran for office, I can remember people that we had no idea who we were, never met them before, who were inspired and got very involved. And then there were some of, in my opinion, his closest friends who didn't really participate at all, which I found at the time disappointing, but then I just learned to realize this may not be their thing. In this startup ecosystem, we have founders here today that struggle to raise capital in this community, are shocked equally, one by folks that they are close to who they perceive to have the means to invest and don't, but then equally shocked by those who they don't know really at all who write a significant check. And so, Doug, the question is, how do we adjust, how do we evolve this ecosystem such that people see the opportunity? A lot of it, I think, is migrating one's risk profile a little bit more up the scale, because when I was raising capital to buy two buildings across the street, and I asked folks to write a $100,000 check, no problem, brick and mortar, I get it, there's a value to it. But if you ask them for $100,000 to put in this startup, pre-revenue, early, friends and family round, they don't have any interest in it. How do we evolve the mindset of this predominantly blue collar? I know we all think we're sexy and we're forward thinkers, but this predominantly still blue collar manufacturing state of mind. How do we evolve that?
Well, I gotta say, I think the blue collar part of that, I think, is actually a benefit to us, right? I think it's a little bit different. I tell people all the time in California, California's a wine state, Michigan's a beer state. There's a lot about that, I think, culturally, that actually is to our advantage, because, in tech, the biggest difference we have between, I think, the healthy startup ecosystems where people do pay it forward, where tech isn't just a kind of funnel of a couple companies getting to the end, but a flywheel, right? Folks sort of reinvesting on success. The first thing any of my friends asked me when we sold our company is like, who are you investing in? Because that's the expectation. That's what it is, right? That's what you do. But that's not really what Michigan sort of feels like, right? It's not that sort of culture, and I think that's what we have to get past. I think a large part of it is, to be frank, at least in this city, I do think there's maybe a well-regarded suspicion of tech, because tech has been imposed in a lot of ways on folks, right? Whether it's, no offense to any of the politicians here, might have been responsible for this stuff, but for Project Greenlight or ShotSpot. I mean, these are controversial, right, in the community. And I think, you know, if you can't see it, you can't be it. How many folks here have ever been in a tech company, like in an office, seen kind of what it does, or you know, all that stuff? We actually created all that culture in Ann Arbor by opening doors, literally. You know, we have a program there that now Ann Arbor Spark runs called Tech Trek, and it's just 20 companies downtown that open their doors, invite the entire community in to see what it is, and you get like a passport stamp, you know, for all the companies you might have seen, get a free T-shirt. But it's a way that basically everyone in the community sees and feels what a tech company is actually like. And then they realize very quickly that less than 20% of any tech company is actually engineers. Right? People don't know this stuff unless you've been there and you realize that, whoa, actually, I can do this, right? And so I think part of that challenge is, and we have things like that in the blue-collar industries we have here, we've done well, right? That manufacturing day, things like that, right? Or I was just talking to Sylvester Hester from LM Manufacturing, and he's been to the 19 schools here in Detroit, you know, talking about what he does and what people can do in his businesses, in his line of work. But people don't get exposed in the same way to tech. And that's a problem. Because if we're talking about generational wealth, right, and what it takes to actually create that quickly, tech is one of the few options you have where you don't need land, lumber, steel, family money, connections. I mean, maybe connections help. But what you need is access and education. And you know, to your point earlier, we're not providing that access and education to that opportunity, right, in tech early enough.
Andre Ash, our man in the street, is now our man in the room over here with the microphone. We got a question from the audience?
Yes, we do. We're going to try to play a little rapid-fire questions and answers from our panel as well, so we can get through many audience questions as we can. We're joined here by Regina Ann Campbell. You've definitely been in the tech space. Please give us your name and title.
So I'm Regina Ann Campbell, President and CEO of Build Institute, and I've been in the economic development space for some time in Detroit and also did some work in Memphis. There's a number of things that have been mentioned in regards to improving the economy and those who are left out. There are many of us in the room who work with businesses in particular when it was mentioned those who started with one truck. The reality is every small business started with 1 or 2 employees, and they grew. And what's missing is the businesses that are 70% of our marketplace and across the country. It's those micro businesses. And so they have to be a part of the conversation so that we can help them get to growth. And that middle piece, I'd love to hear what you all are thinking in regards to those businesses that are in the middle, the micro entrepreneurs, and supporting them. We have the early stage ideator and the dreamers. We have on the other end the high growth. But the meat and the mass, the 70%, are right there in the middle who are micro. What are your thoughts about supporting them, deep dive in its patient capital or investments in our organizations, because we do that work, but they're key to getting to that other side on what you're mentioning. So I'd love your thoughts on what are you doing for those in the middle? How are you thinking about them that are the majority of the businesses?
Thanks so much.
And so you would like to hear from each of them quickly? Is that the...
Whoever wants.
Whoever briefly.
All right, Doug, I'm going to pick you. Go ahead.
Well, I can jump in a bit. I mean, so I'll just say, you know, one definition I think that I will clarify a little bit in terms of startup versus small businesses. Startups are by definition organizations that are in search of a scalable business model, and so they don't want to be small for very long. And I think that's sometimes the difference, because there's nothing wrong with having like a small business, right, where you're serving a local community, local market. You maintain ownership, right, in a way that you don't give up when you're taking investors and so forth. And that's a different model. But startups are very different, right? Startups are high risk, high reward. You're looking to grow as quickly as possible. You're looking to share ownership with as many people as you can, right, so that everyone is sort of invested to get that done. And so it's a little bit different. So I guess I'd say, I think, from what I've seen from the outside, and you all would know better, I think there's a lot of more focus in the city on small business than on, you know, high growth companies. That's you know, when I saw like NEI take a shift, right, towards small business, we see TechTown focusing so much of its efforts really on small business. That's what I see. And what I find missing here in this city versus elsewhere, like in Ann Arbor or what have you, is that focus on kind of the high growth model, right? And it doesn't have to be tech. You know, I just invested in a young founder here who has, again, one restaurant here, Mark Howland from Breadless. I don't know if you've ever been to his restaurant. It's awesome. We have 2 models of kind of what high growth looks like. I think in this region, I think we understand well. One is like tech, it's down Gilbert, right? The other is like villages, right? Like you look at like Little Caesars. Franchise models here work. We understand that really well. Domino's, right? It's a large part of what we've seen here. My hope is that Mark gets to 100 stores in the next 2 years, right? And that's his goal. And so with that goal in mind, he is thinking about how he's building that business differently from the start, because you have to. You have to. It's going to take way too long to build from 1 store to 2 to 3. And so, all of his advisors are the folks who have built these large franchise models, but that in and itself is a completely different business model than sort of what it takes to sort of run, because he's going to run at a loss, right? Like when you're building a high growth business like that, you're taking on capital because you can't starve the baby, right? You have to feed that baby, and they're not going to know how to walk until later, right? But you got to feed the baby. And so I think those are the things that sort of separate the small business kind of challenges from like the high growth startups. But as you say, we need both. And I think the challenge is sometimes we get confused between them, but they're very different animals.
Marla?
I would say that you need both and all, right? So there's like the high growth that a venture capital needs to have, a venture capitalist would fund. But honestly, one of the things that I was really fascinated is how can we get business owners to $1 million in revenue? Not necessarily $1 million in funding, but $1 million in actual revenue, because the reality is that you kind of mentioned the numbers before. There's not as much available funding, bottom line, for even a What's the Deal, which was a new company that might not have much heard of, but kind of like Breadless, but they use pickles instead of lettuce, right? Just got a ribbon cutting in the city of Detroit. How can we get them to $1 million? It takes a different kind of capital structure, right? Because not everybody, Mark is fantastic and great, and Mark has a great background, right? MBA from Harvard, I believe. And there's a Michigan grad, his wife is a Michigan grad. Not every entrepreneur is positioned that way. I think there is a different level of high growth. It is towards generating revenue, and we have to create different ways of funding them. I think angel investing is a really great way. Revenue-based angel investing is a really great way. So innovating the ecosystem itself is really, really important. And again, connecting people with the things that they need, right? There is money that's available for those small businesses that are trying to get in that middle phase, but we just have to make sure that we're connecting them. And that's part of what we're trying to do at DMB.
All right, let's get to another audience question from Victoria.
Hello, my name is Victoria Bell, and I am currently a digital specialist at the University of Michigan. I'm also the
Go Blue.
Go Maze. I'm also the co-founder of a public lighting system called Dimples, and I'm also a co-founder of the nonprofit Concrete Oasis that does pre-K through career electrical skilled trades and engineering workforce development. My question to everyone on the panel, first, if you're already somewhat connected, how can you strengthen your relationships to obtain VC capital, angel investment, and how do you obtain and retain, I guess you could say, mentors, sponsors, specifically sponsorship, to scale? I have a proof of concept, and I haven't been able to get past the proof of concept into prototyping since 2016 because of all types of different issues. I am banked with PNC. Shout out to Michael Bickers. So, just tell me the next step for everyone here that has, they're almost there, but like Dr. Marlowe was saying, you need to scale up.
So in the spirit of time, we'll get maybe 2 of you all to answer that question, and we'll start with you, Patty.
So I just want to say the gap that you're articulating is felt by many, right? And to the thinking of our continuum of capital and where do you go and for what type of capital. One of the programs that Investigatory ID Ventures got involved with is Venture 313. And this is a really good program to help entrepreneurs understand what track are you on. So it's meant, we're in partnership with TechTown, DDP, so being able to say, okay, go to the Venture 313 website will help you try to figure out what is what model are you trying to achieve? How can we find the right partner for you? So being thoughtful about, what different types of organizations that are out there. We've got Paul Jones here working with NEI and Invest Detroit on trying to organize the different small business resources for teams. Lots of groups, Marlo. So trying to connect into the different programs. I think the great thing about what we have and the power in this room is everybody will lend a hand, right? We'll always make a referral. And I think that does make us unique as a community. But you do have to, I do think Venture 313 is a wonderful opportunity for you to go and talk to some different partners in that group to see where you might fit and how we can help.
Marlo, what about what Detroit means business?
I think that, I was going to say Venture 313 is a great thing to talk about. So Detroit Means Business really is about connecting folks to the resources that they need. One thing I want to tell you is that we have a DMB Summit coming up May 2nd. It'll be 300 people. And specifically, there's one-to-one technical assistance. So we're talking about build, we're talking about tech town and all those things. If you don't know how to connect or plug in, this is one of the ways for you to do that plug in. This is one of the ways to connect to the organizations and the things that really help you to move up that you probably didn't know anything about. So Detroit Means Business, we have this, if you go to the website, you can connect to the summit. I think we're almost out of tickets, but try to, kind of make that connection happen because those resources exist and they're out there, but we just aren't really all that great at getting to people in the city of Detroit and making sure that they know how to get it, how to get connected, and that's really our goal.
Why don't you give the web address?
DetroitMeansBusiness.org. Yes, that's the web address, and /summit. But if you go to Detroit Means Business, you will get there.
One other, yes, I think what you just heard is we want to join a community, right, to be able to find your way to these things, because healthy communities actually do pay it forward, and that is the biggest hallmark of any successful startup community, that they give first, right? That's the way you sort of achieve success, but you have to find your way into those kind of communities, and so there are some obviously that are local. There's also some that are statewide. We have an organization called the Michigan Founders Fund, about 100 founders across the state. Over a third of them are underrepresented minority. And all we do is support each other, right? Help each other find paths to success that sometimes are closed off. Because your point about mentors, sponsors versus mentors is extremely important, right? I think that, as you said, I think 0.3% of Black women actually receive venture funding, yet they're the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs, right? What happens a lot, and I've seen in corporate America, being at Cisco and so forth, and I see here all the time, like Black women tend to be over-mentored and underfunded. What we have to do is, when you talk about sponsorship isn't about providing advice or providing guidance, or whatever. It's about opening up access, lending a hand up, giving, making a bet on people. We need to make sure that, in this community, we are all sponsors. We are all helping each other do that. That's the expectation that we have in other communities like Ann Arbor, where you come to an event like this. It's not a good event if you've met a bunch of people. It's a good event if you've introduced a bunch of people. That's the difference. And that's what we have to all keep in mind as we figure out how to build this thing together.
Quentin, I kind of see a path here. We've got Detroit Means Business, then we've got Invest Detroit, and then maybe they get some dough from Doug and they grow a little bit. At what point does a startup, as we've come to define it this morning, at what point should they look to interact with the MEDC, and what resources specifically are there for these high growth, scalable concepts?
Sure. So, I think there are multiple ways and at multiple points. So, for example, we at MEDC provide funding to entrepreneurial ecosystem partners, whether it's the small business development centers, whether it's the smart zones, whether it's Apex accelerators. And so at that early part in this journey, that will be fine. But as companies become second stage or Gazelle, we have one of the most incredible foundations here in Michigan, the Edward Lowe Foundation, that can help. And so that's another partner that MEDC funds. And then ultimately, if companies decide that they are at the point where they want to seek funding, whether it's business development program grants that come up to $10 million or the things that are frequently in the paper, then they can reach out to her. And our website is www.michiganbusiness.org, www.michiganbusiness.org. But just a couple of points. I think that I have a responsibility to make the process more transparent of what is required and what must be true. Because we're dealing with public dollars, there's a certain amount of scrutiny and things that may frustrate people. Because you, the taxpayer, want frustration so that money doesn't just fly out the door. So that's a part of the system, but the onus is on me to sort of try to make that as transparent and help people understand the what must be truths in order to get a yes. We have had offers out to companies led by BIPOC communities, and they decide that's too much. Not prepared for the compliance, not interested in the compliance. We have some that we're hoping that will come back around. And I think the other piece is, and Doug and everyone here, Dr. Venture, Ms. Garza have alluded to it, there are multiple pathways on that startup. I mean, we're doing some things, we're talking startup, and to my mind, I think the other piece of startup is a definable exit strategy from the beginning. Whether that exit strategy is going to be via the public market or through acquisition or whatever, because that, when you start looking for institutional venture capital, that's their exit. They're trying to think through. But you could be a startup on the real estate side. You could start with one building, and we have an emerging developer program. It's different, but you can have an emerging development program, successfully go through that, and begin to get bigger and bigger and have larger and larger projects.
You know, and this would be for any of you here, as we talk about evolving the mindset of those with capital to look at more risky but much more high rewarding if successful opportunities. You know, there are many young entrepreneurs who may have great ideas, but there are no friends and family in their ecosystem to provide that friends and family round of financing. How would you direct those folks in that instance? Anyone can jump
so
in.
we developed a program called Friends and, it was originally Friends and Family, but really it's for access to capital, and we call it FAM. And the goal is to be that first 20, 25,000 check in order to help entrepreneurs who are pre-MVP, who don't have what they need to build, just to get to a point where they can start, getting feedback and to start finding potential users, customers of what they're building. It's not enough, though. We need hundreds of $25,000 checks, and then that lead to $100,000 or $500,000 checks. So we don't have enough velocity of checks that are going out into the ecosystem, and we do need to be thoughtful as it takes many bets, and it takes, an entrepreneur might fail the first 3 times they build an MVP, but that 4th one, wow, that's gonna be the billion-dollar business. So I'd say we need more to create velocity and to create energy here. We have lots of great programs that, the FAM program is just one of them. TechTown has an entrepreneur kind of $5,000 startup piece too, but we need more. And we need to be able to follow on and to be able to allow failure and for folks to try again.
Marla.
I was going to say also, I think what we need to do is unlock the potential of angel investors among us, right? There are a lot of people who have never even heard of the term angel investors, and yet they are, they have the ability to do it. They meet the qualifications, right? So I think that there are people who know themselves, know really well that they can't do a startup, right? But they are interested in getting beyond kind of the 3% high interest savings account. They want to try different asset classes. And so what I would say then is I think that unlocking those friends, those families, those folks, your podiatrist, your orthodontist, whomever, those folks are a really good source and it gets to generational wealth in a different way. Again, not everybody's trying to do a startup, but there are some people who could potentially write that check that have no idea about how to do it. And I think like the Catalyst Angel program at TechTown is a really, really great way to do it. And I also think just looking at different models around loans and things like that, Dewan Dandridge with Black Leaders Detroit, who does a zero interest loan for Black leaders in the city of Detroit, looking at different ways of capital that we can perhaps grow in the community that we have, I think has a lot of upside to us.
Yeah, I'm just, Dennis, if I may, just
Please.
2 quick points. I think legislatively, having an angel investor tax incentive or tax rebate will be helpful.
Yes.
I think you have to kind of educate people on what that is. That's something that the administration has discussed, but obviously it takes educating with our partners in the legislature. But I think Patty hit on something that is incredibly important, and I'm not going to put words in Doug's mouth, but I think he alluded to it. The willingness to let people fail and not brand them a failure. It's a very subtle difference, and I think if you look at communities that have the flywheel effect or the perception of a flywheel effect, you can be a 4th or 5th timer and still have credibility. But also on the angel side, you got to be willing to lose 4 or 5 times, and you can't give somebody money today and 6 months later,
Right.
where my money? It's you gotta, and I think what happens sometimes is we have to create, government has its role. I think the angel investor, R&D, there are things we can do. I will say publicly, everybody on this with whom I'm a panelist are pushing MEDC to be better and the administration to think more broadly about what we can do within the constraints of policy. But we also, as a community, have to decide where are we on our risk tolerance and understanding and respecting the process. Don't give somebody, if you need your $100,000 for your child's education or your retirement, you probably should hold on to it. But if you spend $100,000 gambling, and no knock against gambling, then consider making that, but that's an honest, self-reflective conversation we have to have as individuals and then as a community and as a state.
If I could add real quick, I think in Michigan, a state that knows how to get things done, we're really good at funding execution. Right? Funding execution is about basically funding things we've done before or know how to do already. But innovation is about tackling problems but we don't fully understand by doing things sometimes we've never done before. So we win or we learn, right? It takes a lot of time and effort to get through the learning it takes to create something new, particularly like a new market opportunity. And so, as an angel investor, you have to be aware that, most of the things you're going to invest in are not going to work. That's, that the entire asset class of venture is like that, right? Out of Patty's portfolios, you have a small number that's actually going to work, return the whole fund. The rest will have gained by learning, right? And actually, those serial folks will be more credible as a result. They have gained all that experience and know-how to do it again. But it's a long game you play, right? When I just backed 3 new, Black entrepreneurs actually this week. It's always about, for me, backing the jockey, not the horse.
Right.
They'll figure it out. They're good people. They'll figure it out. They're smart. They hustle. They've got the vision and the commitment to get it done. But it might change. And in fact, I'm quite sure probably some of those things will. But that's the game, right? You're learning alongside with them, everything else. And I think what we need to do is figure out how we get more folks into that, because it's really exciting. Like, it's more fun to be part of all these folks doing something new and creating than doing the same old stuff again.
Thank you. I would ask now, it's 8:53, for each of you just to give a couple minutes of closing. But I'd like you to consider in your remarks, what can the audience in this room? We have bankers, we have president of PNC is here, president of B of A is here. I think there may be others in the room. Sorry if I missed you. But we have bankers. We do have folks like Derek Batts and Rania Cruz who are funders. Doug is here. What advice do you have for us to help these efforts, each of your efforts, progress forward? We'll start with you, and Patty, and we'll work our way down.
Sure. So I would say, and one of the things I didn't say earlier, I do want to emphasize the piece of it's not just who you invest in, but what your team looks like. And this is a very diverse room, but I often don't speak to such diverse rooms. And everyone must take that responsibility of building and growing up our younger talent. Invest Detroit and my team, that is one thing you can't just go out and write a check. You have to learn how to write checks to the right people. And so all of our businesses, how are we being intentional about developing talent and bringing folks up? And so that would be one thing I would ask all of the group, though many of you are already doing that, but for those who have not intentionally really thought about diversifying their teams, that goes a long way to making change. Second, to help what Invest Detroit's mission, really believing in the power of growth and that thinking that we can be big. We don't have to just have, manufacturing and small businesses. We talked about how some small businesses can be super high growth. So being able to think big and encouraging our people to think big would be my takeaway.
Thank you. Doug?
So my own suggestion is whatever you've been blessed to receive, pay it forward. Figure out how you share, because that's the only way we all get this done. I mean, even my own company, when we exited, created 50 plus new millionaires overnight, 500 people in Ann Arbor. We had 19 companies that have been founded out of that, right? Some of them here in Detroit. We have some founders and CEOs who are building those companies now in Detroit. They all understand that, they didn't just, win the lottery ticket, put it in their pocket, and they're done. We're all paying it forward, right? We're all excited because we've seen it happen. Right? In 7 years, we built this, kind of outcome for all of us, and hopefully for many more. But we need everybody, but we need a business culture that is centered around that, where, again, when anyone has success, right, it gets easier for everyone else that follows. And that's really the one point I want to make. If anyone has any questions about, investing or, venture or whatever, I'm game, right? And there's also other folks like Dawn Batts who can, probably teach you better than, because I just write checks all the time, but she actually knows what she's doing. But I would encourage you, find a way to learn more, get involved, and take a chance on people that are starting with these big dreams and visions and trying to do something bigger than themselves.
Thank you. Quentin, how can we help?
Sure. 3 quick things. One, angel investor tax credit. It's tangibly from a policy perspective. 2, I believe gratitude is the seed of the more. So I do, building on Doug's point, I do think even if it's a no, receive it in grace, because you put that out in the atmosphere and it does sort of change the atmosphere and the dynamics. And I think the third thing is, to Patty and everybody's point, Doc's point and Doug's point, we have to give grace to those who try. There's a victory in that. Not everybody is going to create dual security. That's okay. But we will never know if at the first time you're like, yo, man, I lost $50 on that thing, and I ain't never giving him a, and that stuff happens. So just stop it.
And Marlo.
I just want to think about who we're not thinking about when we think about tech. So just really quickly, I want to give you a quick story about a guy named Delane Parnell. Mm-hmm. Delane came from the city of Detroit, built a company called Play VS. He ended up going to California because somebody asked him if he wants to be a millionaire in the city of Detroit or a billionaire on the coast. And he chose the $1 billion route. I believe he raised like $90-something million. He had the highest raise. So this is a young black man who worked in a cellular store. How many of those folks do you know? So when we're talking about, and right now he's creating the infrastructure for esports on a high school level. So esports, I don't know if y'all know, but you can get a scholarship to a college now because of esports. And he's creating the infrastructure for this thing that, all of y'all know somebody who's in a basement playing games. He took that and made a unicorn, basically. So what I want you to think about is a lot of times we're having conversations and we're talking about who have a certain background, a certain level of privilege, could even be Black folks who have been exposed. But there are people in the city of Detroit who have genius, who are actually able to make investors money because they're building and have really, really great ideas. So just when we think about tech, I want us to think about those folks, the people in the city of Detroit, which is a majority Black city. Let's think about those folks and make sure that we're including them in a way that's substantial and in a way that actually works for everybody concerned.
Well, it's 9 o'clock and the gong is going to go off. I want to remind everybody that we are really excited to have Mary Barra join us in May for our Pancakes and Politics session. It'll be a fireside chat. And I'm excited, really coming off of this discussion, because Mary's really making it a point to really try to evolve. We talk about evolving the mindset, but evolving the direction of General Motors. So I would say to Elon Musk, watch out for GM and Mary Barra. Thank you all for coming this morning. I think that, if I were to take away anything from this discussion, it would just be awareness. I don't think that it's fair to ask everyone to go out here and start writing checks. To, I think, a couple of folks' points up here, you definitely shouldn't do so blindly. And I'd be really interested to know if there's any, as part of your programs, which we can discuss later, but are there any ability to be educated as to how to invest? And if there are, then maybe we can have Hiram and the staff send that out to the entire audience, because I think that you should not just go write a $100,000 check if that's supposed to be the college fund. But as opposed to going to the casino, it absolutely makes sense, because not only will you be doing good by the community and the entrepreneur, but you also will be helping to evolve that ecosystem. So thank you very much for coming this morning, and we'll see you in May.
So we're joined here with Margaret Trimmer from Delta Dental, another Pancakes in Politics. First, we appreciate the support and what this certainly means for the community.
Well, as you know, I've chased this sponsorship for years. This is an incredibly powerful room to be in, and I'm truly privileged, and it feels like a victory to be sponsoring here.
We talk about elevating important conversations that need to be had. What are the biggest takeaways for you and what this session does to elevate and bring people together?
Well, the room is packed, first of all.
Definitely.
And it's packed with all the right people, right? And so for me, the takeaway from this room is work it. Work this room, because if you are interested in moving our city forward, all the power, all the energy, all the expertise, and all the money is in this room. And that's a reason to be at Pancakes in Politics.
Talk to us about, being in this room here today. What was your biggest takeaway from the conversation?
The biggest takeaway is that Southeast Michigan can be a place for startups. We have work to do. We're not as far along as some other places, but we do have the potential, and we do have a lot of great activity and energy moving in that direction.
And speaking of startups, you created one, and when you talk about all of these different, from venture capitals to startups being in this room, how important is that to have this collaborative, inclusive effort to make sure that people are at the table for these important conversations?
It's critical. It's critical. Diversity, equity, inclusion, everyone has a voice. We're a community. At our base level, we're a community, and we only achieve things as a community. If only some people at the top make it, that leads to people at the bottom. So, if we work together at it, we can achieve our goals. And our goal is to be one of the most thriving communities in the U.S.